In today's video, we uncover how 5 pets turned on their owners in front of witnesses. From a construction worker's black bear at a backyard barbecue to a software developer's lion during a pool party. But first, a man's morning routine takes a horrific turn when his Bengal tiger decides to end their 3-year bond. It was March 15, 2014, in Whitefish, Montana. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of the Flathead Valley as Marcus Chen unlocked the gates of Wild Haven Sanctuary. The 47-acre property had been his world for 3 years since inheriting it from his uncle. But more importantly, it was home to Raja, the 400-pound Bengal tiger who had become like a son to him. The sanctuary sat nestled between towering pines and overlooked Whitefish Lake, providing the perfect haven for 12 exotic animals. Marcus had bottle-fed Raja as a 6-month-old cub after the tiger arrived, malnourished from a failed circus. Night after night, Marcus slept beside Raja's enclosure during those early months, nursing him back to health with parental devotion. Their morning routine had become sacred. Marcus would enter with breakfast while Raja would greet him with gentle chuffs, often nuzzling against his legs like an oversized house cat. Marcus knew every scar on Raja's golden coat, every preference in his diet, every subtle mood change in his amber eyes, treating each milestone like a proud father would. The bond transcended typical animal keeper relationships. Marcus celebrated Raja's birthday each year with special treats, spoke to him in Mandarin during daily walks, and often fell asleep reading beside the fence, while Raja dozed nearby. When local officials pressured Marcus to install additional barriers, he felt personally insulted. They didn't understand that Raja trusted him completely after 3 years of unwavering care. Marcus had even named Raja after his late grandfather, believing the tiger carried the same gentle spirit. Visitors often watched in amazement as Raja would follow Marcus around like a devoted pet. That morning, Marcus was running late after staying up all night nursing a sick lynx back to health. 5 new volunteers waited nervously for their orientation tour as Marcus hurriedly grabbed Raja's breakfast from the refrigeration unit. Raja's feeding schedule had been disrupted by over an hour, something that had never happened in their 3-year routine. The presence of 5 unfamiliar faces gathered outside the enclosure also created an unusual tension, as Raja had grown accustomed to their private morning ritual. Bengal tigers are apex predators possessing bite forces exceeding 1,000 psi while retaining their predatory instincts, regardless of human bonds formed in captivity. Their 4-inch canine teeth and retractable claws are specifically designed for killing prey, while their 400-pound muscular frames can generate explosive power, covering distances in milliseconds. Even hand-raised tigers maintain their wild nature, with hunting reflexes that can trigger without warning despite years of apparent domestication. Disrupted feeding schedules and the presence of strangers can heighten stress levels in captive big cats, making them unpredictable. Marcus entered the enclosure as he had over 1,000 times before, speaking softly to Raja, who approached with apparent affection. However, Raja's behavior seemed slightly different, more alert, his amber eyes occasionally glancing toward the unfamiliar volunteers watching from outside the fence. The tiger's hunger from the delayed feeding made him more focused on the meat bucket than usual. As Marcus began distributing chunks of meat across the wooden feeding platform, Raja's agitation from the disrupted routine and strange observers reached a critical point. When Marcus turned his back to retrieve more meat, the combination of hunger, stress, and unfamiliar circumstances triggered Raja's predatory response. This simple movement triggered Raja's predatory instincts instantly. The tiger launched forward without warning, his massive 400-pound frame covering the 6-foot distance in one explosive bound. Raja's massive jaws clamped down on the left side of Marcus's neck with crushing force, the 4-inch canines penetrating through skin, muscle, and cartilage before crushing the cervical vertebrae at the C2 level, generating over 1,000 psi of pressure that instantly severed Marcus's spinal cord. Marcus collapsed forward onto the dirt as Raja maintained his deadly grip, the tiger's powerful jaw muscles continuing to compress the neck region while puncturing both the carotid artery and jugular vein simultaneously. Blood began flowing rapidly from multiple puncture wounds, creating an expanding crimson pool beneath Marcus's motionless body as Raja began dragging his victim across the enclosure floor, leaving a gruesome trail while the 5 horrified volunteers screamed and frantically dialed emergency services. Within 90 seconds of the initial attack, Marcus had lost consciousness from massive blood loss and oxygen deprivation to the brain, his body showing no signs of movement as Raja continued his relentless mauling for 4 additional minutes. Emergency responders arrived 12 minutes after the initial 911 call, but could only observe the scene until wildlife officials arrived with tranquilizer equipment. Marcus Chen was pronounced dead from massive trauma to the neck and cervical spine, with catastrophic blood loss as the primary cause of death. The sanctuary was closed immediately by state order, and Raja was euthanized the following day, despite protests from animal rights organizations that the tiger be relocated to an accredited facility. The incident prompted Montana to pass stricter regulations governing private exotic animal ownership. Marcus's devastated family released a brief statement expressing their grief while requesting privacy, struggling to comprehend how their son's greatest love had become his destroyer. Marcus's death led to stricter animal laws across Montana. Meanwhile, Bob Martinez was preparing for a family barbecue in suburban Arizona, unaware that his beloved pet bear was entering an increasingly aggressive phase. It was June 22, 2016, in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. The desert heat shimmered off the concrete patio as temperatures soared past 110 degrees in the sprawling suburban neighborhood of Ahwatukee. Bob Martinez had spent the morning preparing his backyard for the annual family reunion, stringing lights between mesquite trees and arranging folding tables under a weathered ramada. The 52-year-old construction worker took pride in hosting these gatherings, especially when his extended family traveled from Guadalajara to visit his modest ranch-style home. Behind the main entertaining area, a reinforced chain-link enclosure dominated the back corner of the property. Inside, Bruno paced restlessly in the afternoon heat. Bob had discovered the black bear cub 2 years earlier during a construction project in the Tonto National Forest, abandoned and barely alive. Against all regulations and common sense, Bob brought the animal home, convinced he could raise Bruno as a domesticated pet. The bear had grown into a 300-pound adult, yet Bob maintained an unshakable belief in their bond. Black bears typically weigh between 200 to 400 pounds, with males reaching the upper end of this range. Their powerful limbs contain muscles capable of generating tremendous force, while their claws extend up to 4 inches in length. Despite their bulky appearance, black bears can run at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour and possess bite forces measuring over 800 psi. In the wild, they maintain complex social hierarchies and territorial behaviors that captivity cannot suppress. As relatives arrived throughout the day, Bob's nephews, ages 8 and 12, gravitated toward Bruno's enclosure despite repeated warnings. They poked sticks through the fencing and threw ice cubes at the increasingly agitated animal. Bob scolded them repeatedly, but the boys persisted in their teasing whenever adults looked away. Just minutes before the attack, the older nephew had thrown a lit firecracker into the enclosure, causing Bruno to rear up and roar in distress. As the barbecue reached its peak, with 12 family members gathered on the patio, Bob noticed Bruno's extreme agitation following the firecracker incident. The bear stood repeatedly on his hind legs, swaying and huffing with visible stress. Rather than recognizing these clear warning signs of an animal pushed beyond its limits, Bob interpreted them as playful behavior. Emboldened by years of seemingly successful interactions and eager to calm Bruno while impressing his visiting relatives, Bob announced his intention to enter the enclosure and soothe his companion. Bob unlatched the enclosure gate and stepped inside with characteristic confidence. Bruno immediately rose to his full height, towering nearly 7 feet tall. The bear's eyes showed none of their usual recognition, instead displaying the wild alertness of a cornered predator. Bob extended his arms in a calming gesture, attempting to approach as he had done countless times before. Bruno's massive paw struck Bob's chest with devastating force. 4 parallel gashes opened across his torso, the bear's claws penetrating through his cotton shirt and deep into the muscle tissue beneath. The wounds exposed white ribs through torn flesh, as blood immediately began flowing in steady streams. Bob staggered backward, his face registering shock rather than pain in those initial moments. The bear lunged forward, his 300-pound frame colliding with Bob's body and driving him to the ground. Bruno's weight pinned Bob against the concrete floor of the enclosure, crushing his chest and restricting his breathing. Bob's arms flailed weakly as he attempted to push against the bear's massive shoulders. Bruno's jaws opened wide, revealing yellowed canine teeth nearly 2 inches long. The bear's mouth closed around Bob's head with mechanical precision. The crushing force generated an audible crack that carried across the silent patio where family members stood frozen in horror. Several relatives screamed and ran toward the house, while others grabbed chairs and began throwing them at the enclosure, desperately shouting Bob's name. Bob's skull compressed under the tremendous pressure, fracturing in multiple places as Bruno's teeth penetrated the scalp and underlying bone. Bob's body convulsed violently for approximately 30 seconds as neurological damage spread through his brain. His legs kicked spasmodically against the concrete, while his hands opened and closed reflexively. Blood pooled rapidly beneath his head, mixing with saliva from Bruno's mouth. After 3 minutes of sustained pressure, Bob's movements ceased entirely, his body going completely limp beneath the bear's weight. Bruno released his grip and stepped back, blood covering his muzzle and front paws. The bear showed no signs of continued aggression, instead moving to the far corner of the enclosure, where he began grooming himself with methodical licks. Bob's sister-in-law called 911, while other family members threw furniture and barbecue tools at the enclosure in desperate attempts to drive Bruno away from Bob's motionless form. Arizona Game and Fish Department officers arrived within 20 minutes, accompanied by paramedics who could only confirm what witnesses already knew. Department officials euthanized Bruno on site using high-powered rifles, following standard protocol for dangerous wildlife in residential areas. Bob's family returned to Mexico immediately following his funeral, never again visiting the Phoenix area. Bob's death prompted new safety regulations in Arizona. Meanwhile, William Jackson was planning a corporate gathering at his private compound, unaware that his captive Jaguar had begun exhibiting increasingly dangerous predatory behaviors. It was April 18, 2014, in Brazos County, Texas. The sprawling 50-acre estate sat beneath the scorching Texas sun, its manicured lawns stretching toward oil derricks that dotted the horizon like mechanical sentinels. William Big Bill Jackson had built his empire from crude oil and corporate ruthlessness, transforming his wealth into a monument of excess that included exotic cars, imported marble, and a private zoo featuring his most prized possession. Shadow had arrived as a 6-month-old cub, rescued from an illegal breeding operation that Bill had quietly shut down through his political connections. For 4 years, the Jaguar had been Bill's constant companion and ultimate status symbol. Bill personally fed Shadow every evening, speaking to him in gentle tones while the massive cat purred against the reinforced glass. Their bond transcended typical pet ownership. Shadow represented the wild power that Bill had tamed through patience and genuine affection. The Jaguar lived in a custom-built habitat complete with artificial waterfalls, climate control, and observation windows that allowed Bill to watch his beloved predator during quiet moments. Unlike his business dealings, Bill's relationship with Shadow was built on mutual respect and daily interaction. He had hand-raised the cub, bottle-feeding him through illness and celebrating every milestone of growth. On this particular afternoon, Bill hosted his company's board of directors for their quarterly retreat. The 8 executives gathered on the estate's observation deck, overlooking Shadow's enclosure while discussing merger prospects over premium bourbon. Several board members had brought their families, including young children who ran excitedly around the estate grounds. The Texas heat had everyone seeking shade, but Bill insisted on conducting business outdoors to showcase his magnificent companion. As the afternoon wore on, the children grew increasingly fascinated by Shadow's powerful presence. The Jaguar paced restlessly within his enclosure, his amber eyes tracking every movement above. 7-year-old Emma Hartwell, daughter of board member Richard Hartwell, pressed her face against the observation glass, mesmerized by the beautiful predator's graceful movements. The adults continued their heated business discussions, alcohol flowing freely as tensions rose over a controversial merger proposal. In the chaos of corporate arguments and clinking glasses, nobody noticed Emma slip away from the observation deck and wander toward the enclosure's perimeter fence. Jaguars rank among the most powerful predators in the Americas, possessing bite forces exceeding 1,500 PS1, strong enough to crush turtle shells and pierce crocodile skulls. Their stocky, muscular builds and broad heads house massive jaw muscles designed for delivering devastating attacks. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars kill by crushing skulls or severing spinal cords with surgical precision. Shadow embodied these lethal characteristics perfectly. His compact frame concealed explosive power, while his hunting instincts remained razor-sharp despite years of domestication. The jaguar's territorial nature and stress from constant human observation had created a powder keg waiting for the right trigger. Emma found a gap in the outer perimeter fence where maintenance crews had been working earlier that week. The curious child squeezed through the opening and approached the main enclosure, drawn by Shadow's hypnotic golden eyes. She reached her small hand toward the reinforced glass, just as Shadow moved closer, his massive paw pressing against the barrier from the inside. Bill spotted Emma from the observation deck and felt his blood turn to ice. The child stood directly beside the enclosure's emergency access gate, the same gate that maintenance crews used for cleaning and feeding. Emma's tiny fingers found the manual release lever that had been left unlocked after the morning feeding session. Without hesitation, Bill vaulted over the observation deck railing and sprinted toward the enclosure. He reached Emma just as she pulled the lever, causing the heavy gate to swing open with a mechanical groan. Shadow's head turned toward the opening, his predatory instincts immediately activated by the sudden change in his environment. Bill scooped Emma into his arms and pushed her behind him as Shadow emerged from the enclosure. The jaguar's pupils dilated as his hunting programming engaged, recognizing the chaotic movement and high-stress situation as a threat to his territory. 4 years of companionship vanished in an instant as ancient instincts overrode learned behavior. The jaguar launched himself at Bill with explosive force, his massive frame covering 15 feet in a single bound. His powerful paws struck Bill's chest, sending the oil executive crashing backward onto the concrete while Emma scrambled to safety behind a nearby tree. Shadow's jaws clamped down on Bill's throat with crushing precision, his canine teeth penetrating deep into the soft tissue. Bill's trachea collapsed instantly under the tremendous pressure, cutting off his air supply with a sickening crunch. Shadow's bite severed the carotid artery completely, sending arterial blood spraying across the concrete in rhythmic pulses. The jaguar's powerful jaw muscles maintained their death grip, while Bill's body convulsed violently beneath him. Blood pooled rapidly around Bill's head as his cardiovascular system emptied through the massive wound. His legs kicked frantically for 30 seconds before the lack of oxygen to his brain caused complete neurological shutdown. Shadow held his grip until Bill's body went completely limp, then began dragging the lifeless form across the concrete with the same gentle care he had once shown during their evening feeding sessions. The Jaguar's amber eyes seemed confused by the tragedy that had unfolded, his territorial instincts slowly giving way to recognition of his beloved caretaker. Estate security personnel arrived within minutes, using high-pressure fire hoses to drive Shadow away from Bill's mangled corpse. The Jaguar retreated toward his enclosure, blood staining his muzzle as he watched the humans with confused amber eyes. Emma Hartwell was found unharmed but traumatized, hidden behind the tree where Bill's heroic actions had saved her life. Texas Parks and Wildlife Department officials confiscated Shadow the following day, relocating him to a specialized facility equipped to handle dangerous exotic animals. The department launched an investigation into safety protocols at private exotic animal facilities, while Bill's family faced wrongful death lawsuits from traumatized board members who had witnessed the brutal attack. The corporate world mourned the loss of one of Texas's most influential oil executives, though his final act of heroism overshadowed any criticism of his exotic pet ownership. William Big Bill. Jackson's reckless death shocked the corporate world. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, Robert Kim prepared to show off his 12-foot alligator to his neighbors in their annual block party. It was June 7, 2016, in Lafayette, Louisiana. The humid Louisiana afternoon hung heavy over Magnolia Street as Robert Kim adjusted the colorful streamers draped across his backyard fence. At 34, the insurance adjuster had transformed his modest suburban property into the neighborhood's premier entertainment destination, complete with a custom-built pond system that housed his most prized possession. The annual block party had become a tradition, drawing 45 neighbors and their families to celebrate summer's arrival, with barbecue smoke drifting through the air and children's laughter echoing between houses. Robert had spent 4 years perfecting his relationship with Gator, a 12-foot American alligator he rescued from a defunct roadside attraction. What began as an impulsive act of compassion had evolved into an obsession, with Robert dedicating countless hours to understanding his reptilian companion's behavior patterns. He constructed elaborate filtration systems, maintained precise water temperatures, and established feeding schedules that rivaled those of professional zoos. The spring mating season had brought noticeable changes in Gator's demeanor, with increased territorial displays and aggressive posturing that Robert attributed to natural instincts rather than warning signs. American alligators rank among North America's most formidable predators, with adult males reaching lengths exceeding 12 feet and weights approaching 800 pounds. Their prehistoric design has remained virtually unchanged for millions of years, featuring bone-crushing jaws capable of exerting 3,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. These apex predators possess lightning-fast reflexes despite their seemingly lethargic appearance, launching themselves from water with explosive force when striking prey. Despite mounting concerns from neighbors about housing a predator in residential surroundings, Robert remained convinced of his special bond with the massive reptile. The block party represented his annual opportunity to showcase this relationship, demonstrating what he believed was Gator's trained responsiveness to human commands. At 4 o'clock, Robert entered the pond area while neighbors gathered around the reinforced barriers he had installed for safety demonstrations. Gator remained motionless in the deeper section, his yellow eyes barely visible above the waterline, as Robert explained the alligator's feeding habits to the assembled crowd. The barbecue aromas and unfamiliar voices created an atmosphere of heightened stimulation that triggered the reptile's predatory instincts. Without warning, Gator erupted from the water with devastating speed, his 700-pound frame propelling toward Robert with prehistoric fury. The massive jaws clamped down on Robert's torso, crushing ribs and puncturing vital organs as bone fragments pierced his lungs and liver. The alligator's death roll began immediately, spinning Robert's body with violent rotations that separated joints and tore muscle tissue from bone. Neighbors screamed and fled as Gator continued the attack, his serrated teeth shredding through Robert's abdomen while powerful tail thrashes sent water cascading across the yard. The reptile's feeding response activated, with systematic consumption of flesh from Robert's arms and chest as blood pooled in the churning water. Robert's body went limp within 4 minutes as massive internal bleeding and organ failure claimed his life, though Gator continued feeding undisturbed by the chaos surrounding the pond. Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries officers arrived within 20 minutes, immediately shooting Gator to recover Robert's remains from the bloodied water. The festive block party transformed into a crime scene as all 45 witnesses provided detailed statements about the attack they had witnessed. Robert's family released a brief statement requesting privacy while authorities conducted their investigation into the incident. The tragedy sparked renewed debates about exotic pet ownership in residential areas, with local officials reviewing permit requirements for dangerous animals. Robert's death served as a stark reminder that wild predators remain fundamentally unchanged by human interaction, regardless of perceived bonds between species. The alligator attack that claimed Robert's life sparked nationwide debates about exotic pet ownership, but in California, Marcus Chen remained unaware of these warnings as he prepared for what seemed like a routine pool party with his beloved companion. It was August 22, 2013, in Riverside, California. The sprawling estate in Riverside's exclusive hillside community basked under the scorching August sun, its manicured lawns stretching toward the San Bernardino Mountains. Marcus Chen had inherited the property from his grandfather, complete with its unusual feature, a reinforced enclosure that once housed exotic birds, but now contained something far more dangerous. The 30-year-old software developer had transformed the family compound into his personal sanctuary, where he lived with Simba, a 380-pound male African lion purchased from a bankrupt traveling circus 2 years prior. Marcus had fallen on hard times recently, his startup company hemorrhaging money as investors pulled out one by one. The financial strain showed everywhere: deferred maintenance on the estate, overdue bills stacking up, and most critically, irregular feeding schedules for Simba. What had once been daily meals of fresh meat had dwindled to sporadic offerings, leaving the massive predator increasingly restless behind deteriorating fence posts and rusting locks that Marcus couldn't afford to repair. Despite his mounting troubles, Marcus had planned this pool party for weeks, inviting 32 friends and co-workers to celebrate what he hoped would be a turnaround in his fortunes. The afternoon gathering featured an elaborate barbecue setup with pounds of raw steaks, chicken, and ribs arranged on preparation tables near the pool deck. The aroma of seasoned meat filled the warm air as guests arrived, unaware that just 50 yards away, a starving apex predator caught every scent carried on the desert breeze. African lions are among nature's most formidable predators, capable of taking down prey weighing over 1,000 pounds. Adult males like Simba possess jaw muscles that generate crushing force exceeding 650 pounds per square inch, while their 4-inch canine teeth are designed to puncture vital organs and sever major blood vessels. When deprived of regular meals, these apex hunters become increasingly aggressive and opportunistic, their predatory instincts overriding any learned behaviors or social bonds. At 3:47 p.m., as Marcus stood over the smoking grill wearing a barbecue-stained apron, the deteriorated lock on Simba's enclosure finally gave way. The massive lion had spent 3 days without food, his powerful nose detecting the overwhelming scent of raw meat preparation from across the property. Driven by starvation, Simba padded silently across the lawn toward the pool area, where 32 guests mingled around tables laden with food. The first person to notice the approaching predator screamed, but Marcus remained focused on the grill, his back turned to the enclosure. Simba's yellow eyes locked onto the man whose clothes reeked of raw meat juices and barbecue smoke. In the lion's starved state, Marcus represented competition for the abundant food source, rather than the familiar caretaker who had once provided regular meals. Simba launched himself forward with explosive power, his 380-pound frame covering the final 20 feet in 2 massive bounds. The lion's front paws struck Marcus between the shoulder blades, sending him crashing face-first onto the concrete pool deck as the hot grill toppled beside them. Before Marcus could roll over, Simba's jaws clamped down on his torso just below the rib cage, the predator's canine teeth punching through skin, muscle, and bone with sickening efficiency. The crushing bite force collapsed Marcus's lower ribs instantly, the sharp bone fragments puncturing his liver and right lung. Simba's powerful jaw muscles continued applying pressure as he shook his head violently from side to side, the motion designed by evolution to break the necks of struggling prey. Marcus's body convulsed as internal bleeding flooded his abdominal cavity, his punctured lung filling with blood and preventing coherent screams. 32 horrified guests watched as Simba began the feeding process, his rough tongue and sharp teeth tearing away chunks of flesh from Marcus's chest and abdomen. The lion's feeding behavior followed ancient instincts, consuming the nutrient-rich organs first, while his victim's heart still pumped blood through severed vessels. Marcus's movements grew weaker as massive blood loss and respiratory failure shut down his vital systems, his body entering shock as Simba continued feeding just yards from the abandoned barbecue. Within 4 minutes, Marcus Chen was dead, his own beloved pet consuming his remains while 32 witnesses fled in terror toward the estate's main gate. Riverside County Sheriff's deputies arrived 18 minutes after the first 911 call, finding Simba still feeding beside the pool. Officers were forced to shoot the lion multiple times to secure the scene for investigation. The incident prompted renewed calls for stricter exotic animal ownership laws in California, though Marcus's family declined to comment publicly on the tragedy. If these shocking pet attacks left you stunned, click the next video now to dive deeper into the world's most dangerous encounters.